Tonight we go after the story of the woman who violated convention and bucked powerful opposition to lead the birth control movement in America.
Margaret Sanger's actions on behalf of a woman's reproductive system has led to the legacy of Planned Parenthood Federation, which aids women by spreading education on contraceptives and advocating for the expansion of women's rights. Her story begins in 1879 when she was born into a family of 11 children. Margaret Sanger witnessed her mother's health deteriorating as her mother struggled to raise her children in an environment of extreme financial hardship. Sanger realized that the combination of 18 pregnancies and poverty was the cause for her mother's premature death. After starting her career as a nurse, Margaret was surrounded by various cases of unfortunate childbearing. Sanger particularly cared for Sadie Sachs. As a mother of 3 children, Sachs was ill with septicemia and suffered from self-induced abortion. Sachs later passed away after another self-induced abortion, prompting Sanger to vow a change in the future of childbearing mothers. Despite the medical advances in contraceptives during the 1830s throughout the 1850s, Congress, following the argument of reformer Anthony Comstock, labeled the distribution of information about contraceptives as obscene. However, remaining loyal to her vow, Margaret Sanger began her campaign, ignoring the Comstock Law which forbade the distribution of articles intending to prevent contraception. It was the beginning of a new century and a time of progress. The voice of women was growing louder, and Margaret Sanger just wanted to be heard.
The reason she supported birth control was that she believed every woman, without regard to race, creed, color, religion, what have you, had the right to decide how many children to have. And she was supported in this by, eventually, a huge cross-section of American society.
Margaret Sanger began her course of actions in 1910 when she spoke in public contesting for the distribution of birth control information, while also recounting the unfortunate situations of various female patients who she nursed. In 1914, the beginning of World War I, Margaret Sanger established the National Birth Control League and initiated publishing her own newspaper called The Woman Rebel. This led to her arrest, putting her on trial for issuing obscene material. It consisted of drawings of the female reproductive system. At the same time, 100,000 copies of a small pamphlet, Family Limitation, which contained knowledge on various uses of contraception, was published in 1914. This small pamphlet coined the name birth control. After this publication, Sanger fled to England to escape her trial. Upon return to America in 1915, Sanger suffered with the death of her daughter, Peggy, who passed away from a severe case of pneumonia. In reaction to Sanger's anguish, the sympathy emanating from the public caused the government to drop all charges against her. Margaret Sanger, however, resumed her course of actions and opened the nation's first birth control clinic in Brooklyn, New York. Over 400 eager women came to the clinic's doorstep, but only after 9 days in operation, the center was raided by police, and Margaret Sanger, along with her sister Ethel, and staff members of the clinic were arrested. She was tried and convicted to 30 days in a women's penitentiary in Queens, New York. Sanger appealed to the state of New York against her convictions. Although Judge Frederick E. Crane, the judge at her trial, rejected her beliefs of birth control along with her appeal, he allowed physicians to prescribe contraceptives to married women whose lives were in danger due to the ailments of pregnancy. In 1917, Margaret Sanger published the first issue of the Birth Control Review, which was intended to display information on women's health, but instead sparked extreme controversy about her beliefs in eugenics. Even though she later took the position of editor of the review rather than the writer, in her 1921 October issue of the Birth Control Review, titled The Eugenic Value of Birth Control Propaganda, Sanger stated,
"The campaign for birth control is not merely of eugenic value, but is practically identical in ideal with the final aims of eugenics. The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the overfertility of the mentally and physically defective."
Sanger's following writings began to express her growing opinion on eugenics. In her 1922 book, The Pivot of Civilization, Sanger condemned charity work in a chapter titled The Cruelty of Charity for perpetuating the very issues they sought to solve. Sanger wrote,
"Organized charity is itself the symptom of malignant social disease. Those vast organizations aiming to control the spread of misery are the surest sign that our civilization has bred, is breeding, and is perpetuating constantly increasing numbers of defectives, delinquents, and dependents."
Margaret Sanger received stronger criticism when she began lecturing to organizations such as the Women's Auxiliary of the Ku Klux Klan and became involved with the American Eugenics Society, in which her name was listed in their records as Margaret Sanger Slee, using the name of her second husband, James Noah H. Slee. Despite Sanger's forwardness in her philosophy of eugenics in her writing, she was quite careful in conveying this belief in her public appearances and speeches.
Well, Margaret Sanger was very clever because Margaret Sanger knew enough not to specifically talk about races. What she would do is she would talk about areas of town. She would frequently give talks in New York City and talk about certain areas of New York City where there were too many children, etc., which if you were alive then and you knew who lived in those areas of town, then you would know exactly who she was talking about.
In 1921, Margaret Sanger established the American Birth Control League. 2 years later, she founded the nation's first physician-run birth control clinic. Following World War I, the question of birth control use to manage population and decrease poverty was renewed.
The population question is a great concern today, and the rate at which the births come in to we're saving them now. At one time, when children died, they didn't have the food. Today, our population all over the world is getting certainly better consideration and better conditions than they had at the time that I was there.
During 1939, the American Birth Control League and the Birth Control Clinical Research Bureau merged into the Birth Control Federation of America, which was later renamed the Planned Parenthood Federation in 1942. In 1953, the International Planned Parenthood Federation was founded in Bombay, India, with the help of family planning leaders in Europe and Asia. In 1965, several months before her death, her vow to change the destiny of married women was fulfilled when the U.S. Supreme Court, in the case of Griswold v. Connecticut, decided to invalidate all state laws which forbade the use of contraceptives in marriages. These rights would later be extended, in 1972, to people who were not involved in a marriage. Today, Margaret Sanger is still a controversial topic and is resented by certain individuals and organizations, such as the American Life League, who strongly opposed her philosophy as eugenics as well as her belief in contraceptives. Sanger's alliance with the eugenics movement existed as merely a stain on her legacy. By protesting her beliefs that marriage is not merely an item created for the sole purpose of begetting children, but a relationship formed through the love and attraction between a man and a woman, Margaret Sanger opened possibilities which have allowed controversial issues such as same-sex marriage to exist in many countries, along with the American states of Massachusetts and Connecticut. Her actions of distributing articles on women's health, crusading for the use of contraceptives in America, and establishing nearly 500 clinics nationwide led to her legacy represented by the Planned Parenthood Federation today. With 880 clinics nationwide, Planned Parenthood carries Margaret Sanger's legacy by giving each individual the proper information needed to make proper decisions about sex, health, and family planning. With International Planned Parenthood Federation's clinics established in 18 countries, the number of deaths related to pregnancy complications among women continues to gradually decrease internationally. In America alone, the maternal death rates are currently at 0.01%. However, in the early 1900s, 1 out of every 100 women died from childbirth. Planned Parenthood also carries on Margaret Sanger's legacy through educating youth in the Philippines, Guatemala, and India on sexual health and through advocating for the expansion and protection of a woman's reproductive rights in Trinidad, Tobago, and Kenya. Margaret Sanger faced arrest and jail as she crusaded with the singleness of a purpose to give women the right to have control over their own reproductive cycles. Planned Parenthood, nationally and internationally, is her legacy.